Hi there. So I heard someone talking about who to promote in HR, and they said that the person in question didn't have executive presence. So I got curious about that because you might want to be promoted. So let's figure this all out now. Hi there. I'm Andrea Adams, and this is the HR Hub. If you want to learn about HR, you've come to the right place. Please subscribe to the show or to the podcast to keep on learning. Today, my guest is Stephan Wiedner. Stephan is a coach and psychological safety expert. He's the CEO of Zarango and Noomii. It's through his coaching work that he knows something about executive presence. Hi, Stephan. How are you?
I'm very well, Andrea. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. We're going to just dive right in. So, executive presence, what is it?
Yeah, great question. What is it, right? It's hard to put your finger on it. What we've tried to do is concretize it, make it a little bit more tangible by understanding how leaders are perceived by the people around them. We do that through performance-based assessment. So we've developed an assessment called the FISM, which stands for Facilitative Interpersonal Skills for Managers. And the way we assess folks is we give them stimulus videos that are challenging moments you might find in a team, and we ask them to respond. Then we can look at those responses, and that tells us a whole lot of information. And remember, these are challenging moments in a team. So what we get to see is people in the most difficult situations, because as an executive, it's easy to have good presence when everybody's getting along. It's harder to do so when there is a potential rupture or some sort of conflict or a difficult communication issue within a team environment. And so what we regard as this idea of executive presence is it really comes down to how people perceive you. And we use the social influence theory to really understand what that is and how to break it down. And ultimately, social influence theory looks at three ways that we evaluate one another all the time. And you can use a simple acronym, E, T, and A. So the E is expertness. So it's as you communicate, how am I perceiving your expertness? How am I perceiving your trustworthiness? And then the last one is A, which is attractiveness, which doesn't mean physical attractiveness. It's more around how likely I would want to be able to hang out with you. Do I see you as being similar to me, maybe funny, curious, that kind of thing. So when we're interacting with people, we want to make sure that, especially those who are in a leadership position, you need to be strong in all three of those. You need to have expertness, trustworthiness, and attractiveness. And what we see with a lot of leaders is that they really lean on their expertness. So they really lean on their knowledge of the domain or the space that they're in, and they forget maybe about the trustworthiness and attractiveness. And the whole point with social influence theory is that you can flex your muscles. So those are three different areas that you need to flex to develop rapport within an environment. And in some cases, you want to lean on the E, expertness. In some cases, you want to lean on the T, trustworthiness, and in other cases, you want to lean on the A, the attractiveness. And combining all three of those is what I would call your executive presence.
Okay, so when does executive presence become important, and why? Why were they talking about it when they were talking about promoting this person?
Well, I think it's some sort of gravitas. That's what they're really talking about. They're talking about wanting to promote someone who is going to be easily followed, right? Someone who people want to follow, people, as opposed to someone who you promote and then they kind of have to force their way through. You want someone who's a natural leader, if you will. And I think that's what they mean by executive presence, don't you think?
I think you're right. I totally think you're right, where it's just they want someone who has the appearance of executive presence, whereas what you're talking about is far more than that surface level stuff.
Our work is really drawn on the work and the research that's been done in counseling. So what is counseling? Let's look at that. You have two individuals behind closed doors interacting with one another. And ideally, the individual participating in counseling or who is there has some form of a goal, right? They want to improve their marriage or whatever it is, deal with anxiety, etc. And why does counseling work? This is a question that many researchers have been scratching their heads and asking for well over 40 years. And one of the answers is that you are more likely to follow through with your actions out of a counseling session if you believe that that person across the table is trustworthy, is expert, and is someone that you can relate to. Basically, if you feel like they are good, you are going to get good results. It's a placebo effect in a way. It really is. Like, if you think you are going to get good, if this person is expert, then you will get better results. So it has nothing to do with, well, it has everything to do with them, and it has everything to do with your perception of them. And so if we can extend that exact same concept to leadership, it's the same darn thing. It's the same thing. As a leader, you will get better outcomes from your team, from the people around you, if they believe you are expert and trustworthy and likable.
I guess the difference between your counselor and your executive is that, I mean, they're like, let's say your executive has executive presence. The difference is that your counselor has a different expertise, but they're still trustworthy and they're still attractive. It's just that the expertise is different. And when you put,
Exactly. I think it's the same social skills, but in a totally different context. And so how you interact is different. They're not exactly the same, but I think the principles are the same.
Yeah. Okay. What impact is a lack of executive presence going to have?
Well, that's a good question. Lack of executive presence, I think, just has people question you a little bit more, or you might have a little bit more freelancing, people saying one thing to your face and then doing another thing because they think that's better. So maybe not quite as collaborative. And I hate to use the word compliant, but what occurs to you? Like what ends up happening if someone doesn't have executive presence?
When somebody else does have executive presence and you don't get the job. So when we talk about the three aspects of executive presence, let me remember trustworthiness, attractiveness, and expertise. What are the strategies to develop each?
So expertness is very much a function of your knowledge. So you need to be expert, but it's also the way you communicate your expertise. So what we're looking for there are things like verbal fluency or verbal flow and persuasiveness. So how well are you able to articulate the ideas in your head? So that's around verbal flow. And the other is persuasiveness. How well are you able to have someone see a perspective that's different from their own? And that is a significant skill to demonstrate expertness.
So I'm going to skip trust because I did an episode on that. What about the other one, attractiveness? That actually is an interesting one. How do you make yourself more attractive without, getting plastic surgery?
Again, it's not physical attractiveness, obviously. So what we're talking about is interpersonal attractiveness. Let's call it that, IA, interpersonal attractiveness. And there's a couple aspects to it. Some of it just comes down to your personality. Do people want to hang out with you? So one significant skill that you might want to add to your toolbox, if you will, if you're a leader, is storytelling.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell stories? After a weekend, it's Monday morning, you're all in the office together and you're having a quick little all right, folks, what's on the table for this week? you don't want to necessarily get to business right away. You might want to start with a 1 minute, 30-second, like, how was your weekend? And if in 30 or 60 seconds, you can communicate a compelling story that draws people in, is interesting, is fun to listen to, that makes you a lot more attractive as a leader. You're not just all business all the time.
Right.
And again, it doesn't need to be a 20-minute story either, right?
Yeah, right.
Just how do you take your irregular daily occurrences and turn them into engaging opportunities to share a story? And can you do so in an animated manner? Are you effective at being able to deliver the punchline on a story? And do you communicate in a way that's animated? Do you have a sufficient emotional expression? Emotional expression is something that we measure, and what we see with a lot of leaders is that they have very low affect, and they communicate rather monotonously, and they have very little facial expression. So how do you communicate with your face? How do you communicate with your hands? Do you lean into the camera? Do you sit back from the camera? Do you change and modulate your tone according to the circumstances? All of that is pointing to a certain level of attractiveness. It's like emotional congruency and developing emotional congruency with the situation, with the people in the room.
That's interesting. It got me thinking, because sometimes as a leader, and especially some of the leaders I've come across, if the less they would show on their face, the higher they went. So it's kind of the opposite of what you're saying.
Possibly. What we would advocate is that you as a leader can develop and flex muscle. So the idea is static is bad, flexible is good. Static bad, flexible good, or rigid bad. So you don't want to be rigid. And with the ET and A acronym, recognize that you can flex one or the other in various situations. So if you're trying to boost your attractiveness, your interpersonal attractiveness, I gave some suggestions for how to do that. However, maybe within your work environment, that is not deemed very valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe for those who are a little bit more animated and talkative, that's perhaps a hit to your executive presence in that particular environment, because we're all scientists, or we're all, depending on the environment. And so I think you need to have a fine level of attunement to know what are the appropriate skills that I need in this particular environment.
You have talked a couple times or mentioned it that you can measure people's executive presence. How?
So as I mentioned, there's the interpersonal assessment that we've conducted, where it is a performance-based assessment. We deliver people with clips, and we measure their responses. So we look for what we do is, when we look at their video responses, we can code their behaviors and we can give a score. So we look for 8 different dimensions, and with each, you can give someone a score of 5 out of 5 or a 1 out of 5. 5 being a really high level score, 3 out of 5 being neutral, and 1 being actually detrimental or a poor use of the skill. And so what we've been able to do is develop this assessment in a way that we've also trained individuals so that we can get a high level of inter-rater reliability. So that if you and I, if we were both trained in this particular instrument and looked at the same person, we would give them roughly the same scores for all of these 8 dimensions of interpersonal skills that we're looking for. And so that's how it's done. And I would argue that one of the ways, it's a little bit more informal, this assessment specifically looks at how you interact with these challenging moments. However, one way that we look at executive presence could be just in someone giving a presentation. So there is no interpersonal dynamic here. It's just them. And with Noomii.com, we have a network of thousands of coaches all over the world. And what we've started doing in the recent months is started interviewing coaches on video and creating 1 to 3 minute videos that they're kind of like their elevator pitches. And we've helped coaches with these. And what's so fascinating to me is we've taken two videos. There's one where the coach, you look at it and you're like, wow, very compelling. You look at another one like, not so much. And yet it's hard to put your finger on it. It's hard to identify why is that person sound so compelling and that person not, when often they're saying very similar things. And that, I think, points to some of the intangible quality of executive presence. And so what we've been able to do is we filtered these videos through this same 8 dimensions, and lo and behold, it's like, holy moly, this person is scoring really high on all of these 8 dimensions that we're measuring for interpersonal communication. And they're scoring really high when it's just this video where then it's just them talking into the camera. And this other individual is scoring lower. And so again, it's all of these same sort of things. It's verbal flow, it's emotional expression. To what degree do they express empathy, right? So as a coach, you're trying to sell your services, but you're trying to say, hey, I work with people like this. If you're struggling with A, B, C, or D, like if you can do that and communicate to the other person what they're feeling, that demonstrates empathy. One of the dimensions is called alliance capacity. So to what degree do you talk about we, right? Do you use we language in your communication, or is it me, I, and you? And so that's one of the dimensions we assess. And then one of them is interpersonal responsiveness. Like, are you able to and willing to go to those uncomfortable places? Are you willing to name the challenges that people have? Again, it was kind of eye-opening to us and unexpected, but these were all things we were able to assess in a 2-minute little individual bio, as well as in clips where people are interacting with challenging moments within a team. So I think these skills are universal. They're basically observable all the time, everywhere.
Ask, what are some misconceptions of executive presence?
Sorry.
I've got some in mind. So how about I throw some at you? So I have a conception of executive presence as someone who's commanding and charismatic, probably tall, middle-aged white man. How is that perception inaccurate?
So is what you're saying that in order to have executive presence, you need to be tall, middle-aged, and be a white male? Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
It's definitely something that's floating around in the back of my brain.
So what is it, do you think, about a white middle-aged man that says executive presence? What is it about them?
Well, it's all about bias, okay? So it's biases. It's, that they're going to be competent. Just being a tall white man, middle-aged probably, means that conveys some confidence, but it also conveys some attractiveness. Like in society, maybe that person is more attractive. Again, a bias. And if I think about it on trustworthiness, I can't say that a tall middle-aged white man's going to be trustworthy. I don't think that's a bias I have, but certainly I got the other two going.
Well, let's look at it this way. I think you're absolutely right in that people are going to have all sorts of biases. When you first meet someone, you're going to have all sorts of ideas running through your head about how smart they are, how trustworthy they are, how likable they are. All these sorts of ideas are going to be floating around in your head. And then I think the question is, how much can that be influenced, right? And I think there's some people that are going to be absolutely fixed. So they're not going to change their perception of you. And yet with time, hopefully most people can change their perspective on individuals. And that's what we can control. So as a leader, that's all you can do. You can't force someone to see you in a certain light. Yeah. And if you happen to be short and you happen to be non-white, some other ethnicity, if someone is going to be biased in that way, I mean, that's a tough hill to climb, and that sucks. Like, that quite frankly sucks. Yeah. I feel rather unfortunate, and or I feel sad for those who are in that position. And I think we want to focus on what you can influence. And ultimately, when we look at ETA, when we look at social influence theory, what we're talking about there is overall like your credibility.
Yeah.
And we all make these little judgments. So you might want to really consider how other people perceive you based on how you dress, how you show up in a meeting. Are you prepared or not? Like all of these little habits add up to your perceived credibility. And so one of the great strategies, sure, we have an assessment and we try to identify what people's weaknesses are in terms of their communication skills and how they can improve. And there's also great value in conducting 360s and getting feedback from the people around you and asking them straight up, how do you perceive this leader? And then how might this leader boost their expertness? How might this leader be more trustworthy, etc.? So you want to be able to ask these specific questions so you can start to understand, well, what are the ways that I can show up and be more of and have more executive presence? Whether or not you wear glasses, that affects people's perception of your expertness 100%. So what it is that you can control and change, you might want to explore that and do that.
Should I be wearing my glasses? I do have glasses that I wear that I don't 100% need, so I don't wear all the time. Final question here. If someone wants to know more, what do you suggest?
Well, I am relatively active on LinkedIn. I have to say social media is not at the very top of my list in terms of activities I do all the time. And so I would love for people to connect with me on LinkedIn. So if you just search for my name, or my URL on LinkedIn is linkedin.com/IN/S Wiedner, my first initial and my last name. You can find me there.
I'll put that in the show notes.
That'd be perfect. You can also connect with me on our website, Zarango.com, as you already mentioned. Now, Zarango.com, we focus on psychological safety. So you'll see the headline there is all about psychological safety. And we deliver training around leadership skills that foster psychological safety and how to create an environment where individuals have the courage to speak up and the confidence to know that when they do speak up, what they have to say matters and will be heard and appreciated in the work environment. So, I guess the best thing to do there is just check out the website and you can connect with me there through the contact us form.
Thanks, Stephan. I really enjoyed that. The things I'm going to take away are the small things we can do to improve our executive presence, even if we aren't all white, middle-aged, and male. I did a couple episodes that touched on things we talked about here. One was unconscious bias, which is right here, probably one that I should be rewatching. And the other one is about trust, and that's right there. Thanks for watching out there. We'll catch you next time when I talk with another insightful guest.